from vacation, and there's a lot to unpack here at home and also at Big 12 Media Days. Here are my thoughts on the topics from Dallas. Welcome back to One More Night, a UCF podcast, one team, one heartbeat. It's Coach Wolf. If you follow me, you normally see me do five things we're going to talk about. Little different over the next few episodes. We're actually going to take the next five episodes and keep them topic oriented. So first, today we're going to talk about the media days that happened in Dallas. And then in the next episode, I'm actually going to give you my take, my projection for how the Big 12 will end this season of football, like where the rankings will be, who will come out on top, and where UCF falls in that mix. Then, as I told you before I left on vacation, it's been 30 years that we've been in Division One. So I'm doing a kind of a 3 and 30. So 3 episodes covering the 30 years, breaking it off into 10-year increments. So that's going to be my next 5 shows. Now, I will, during the show, also, if there's been things that have happened, discuss those as well. But the topic today is mainly going to be from what I saw in Big 12 Media Days. So the representation we had was, of course, head coach Scott Frost. Terry Mohajir was there as well, our AD. And he did make a comment, like all coaches, head coaches were there, but he did make a comment that most ADs go, but there were a few. And he did say a comment, like, I guess it's even hard for the coaches. I guess this, they have a little bit when they finish like those summer workouts, and they really get a couple of weeks in July. And that's the only time during the year that they really get to do like true, like, vacation time. And so they kind of had to come there, so some ads are kind of in the midst of that. And of course the head coaches have to be there. And Scott even mentioned that he came from one vacation, then he's actually was heading on a red eye to go to Italy because Cooper, his OC, is getting married over there. And so, like I said, squeezing all that in this month. So the 4 players that Scott took was quarterback Alonzo Barnett, which is good because, one, we know we have a quarterback because last year we didn't take one. He took offensive tackle Preston Cushman. He took linebacker Lewis Carter, and he took defensive back Jaden Bellamy. So those were the 4 Knights representing. Kind of had probably the leader on both the offensive defense. I believe Alonzo's kind of that offensive leader, and Lewis Carter is the defensive leader. So you had those there. I didn't see, like, I saw some things that UCF posted with the players, but the only one I actually saw getting any interview time was Alonzo Burnett. And basically just kind of asking him, why'd you choose UCF? And pretty much the same answers we've heard as Knights fans, but those that maybe only look to the Big 12 to kind of see what other teams are doing, they heard some of the same things. Scott and McKenzie just feels like they're developing. He'd gotten his 4 years at James Madison, was looking to make that 5th-year eligibility as a place where he could go and can compete for a championship. And he honestly believes that UCF is a good fit for that. And but you could tell, just very charismatic, very, very good interview, and enjoyed listening to him because one of the biggest complaints media members were having was not getting access to Alonzo. And we've had a lot more of that. And you just see just what a great young man he is. Now, as far as Scott, he did really 2 things that I saw. He had the interview with, the ESPN people, Lewis and some of those. And then he had the panel where he goes up and gets interviewed with the media. And of course, the Suns and a couple other people, like, they go and bounce around. But those are the 2 I really kind of want to talk about. And so when they were interviewing him up at the desk, the one thing he said was just how excited he was about the team. And it's funny because every coach has that sentiment, right? Every coach has that, we're excited about the team. So it was a mantra from all of them there. But one of the things he was asked about was his getting the transfer quarterback Alonzo Burnett. It said he'd been kind of watching him, even since last year. I mean, they kind of knew that they were going to need a quarterback through the portal. Knew he had some good freshmen coming in, but knew he was going to have to get some help. Probably knew that the guys were not going to stay that we had on there. And so, he just just really said that, he was really, looking forward to seeing what Alonso could do in this offense. Yes, he didn't do as much in spring, in front of people, but had been working with the, receivers, and just really excited about his leadership and, his abilities that he saw in the games that he played. So, then also asked about the running back room. It was mentioned about the transfer from Louisville, and he was injured, but looks like he could be exciting. And Scott immediately went back and said, "Well, we got a freshman that would have been exciting last year too." Talking about Swint, so really think that he's going to be a key one. He also mentioned the other one that had transferred in. So we got the two transfers, and then pretty much all the rest of the running back room, which I went over in an earlier podcast. But that makes me feel good because I really think it's going to be kind of that three-headed monster kind of rotation. We'll kind of see what the ABC order is once we get closer, especially once they put the depth chart out that first week before the first game. Then they talked about his DBs, and he said, I've got a good returning set of defensive backs. We have some great additions that we had. He said that's probably going to be the most competitive, as far as positioning, and players are going to have to produce at that one, because if not, you can be easily replaced. Another thing they were talking about was just the Big 12 in general, because the last time he was here, of course, we were with the American, and they were like, "So what have you thought about the Big 12?" And he echoed again, "You like from afar, I always." Thought this was a tough competitive league. I played in it when I was in Nebraska. It was the Big 12 back then. So he's played in it, a couple of years. And he just says it's just from top to bottom, very competitive. I don't know if I agree top to bottom. There definitely, to me, is the upper echelon of just a couple of teams, and then that middle section is probably the most competitive. And then I feel like there are some that are going to struggle this year, but they can, you can get clipped any weekend by any team. I mean, that's college football. That's why I like it so much, is because just the craziness that can happen. So another thing they wanted to touch on to kind of end up was like, well, all 16 coaches really back the 24 team playoff. What's your thoughts on that? And he goes, it really doesn't matter what I think, because they're going to do it every, 2 months, something changes, and, it kind of comes out there. But he just feels like the Big 12 has good, caliber teams that are just getting left out. And he kind of talked about BYU getting left out last year, because they really kind of said, "Well, do you still want to keep those championship games?" And he goes, "Well, I really like them. I really like having the championship game." But he goes, "When you get to the NFL, you don't play like an NFL West and NFL East championship game and then do the playoffs. You go straight to the playoffs. So whoever makes it just goes." And as much as he likes those games, he felt like the game that BYU played against Texas Tech in the championship game is what caused them to not get in. And granted, they didn't have very good showing either time against Texas Tech. And maybe if they hadn't played them twice and it was so bad both times, but the game actually hurt them. I think if they don't play in a championship game, they had a chance to probably make it. But when they did, even though Texas Tech was a top five, they got left out. So Scott said that, he really, likes to see, getting some more of these teams some chances. And then, of course, you had the media. So the media, gets up, or he goes and gives a statement, and then the media can ask questions. And what was so awkward is Scott gets up there and he gives his little, preemptive thing that he does, just kind of, talking about what the season entails and all this kind of stuff. And then they open up for questions. It was like 40 seconds before somebody finally, and thank God it was one of our guys with 24/7, finally kind of got the ball rolling. And so once he got the ball rolling, there were more and more questions, but it seemed like if it got kind of dead, one of our guys would kind of step in, because we get access to Scott. So we kind of would like to hear what maybe some of the other ones wanted to do. But a couple of things that I picked out of there is, one of the ones that was asked was like, last year, it kind of threw out this year zero with you because of the way you came in. And he kind of talked about it. He said, it was tough because the portal was open when he got there. And so some guys had already gotten in, visited, already signed. He gets there, he's got no assistant coaches, because he's got to still get that built up, and all these people are doing it. Of course, he's not having access to players. I mean, he just had too many things to do at one time, trying to get it all figured out. That this year, being that they were there, they were put a plan together. He just felt like it was much much more streamlined and much more the way they want to do it so that they can get some of the players they wanted to do and felt pretty good. He did say that every year. Last year was definitely challenging having all new players, so many. And I mean, basically, to even the ones that stayed were new to him, but having, some continuity, but there's always going to be changes. He says, this is just kind of where we're at. And he actually echoed one of the other coaches said the same thing. Like, each year now, the teams are going to be different. You're not going to have a team that sticks together and just stays for long periods of time. It's just not the way it is now. So, but definitely, said it was great having, coaches return, some of the players return. So he felt like, they were much more ahead of schedule, even after the portal window, people coming in, kind of knowing how practice runs, does that kind of stuff. And that kind of gets me into one of the best questions. I thought there were two really good questions. And one of them was by Andrew Cherico. And any of y'all that follow UCF know Andrew. Just an excellent young man. They did the story piece on him this year in one of the game days, and just he asked Scott, he was talking about, like, I know you don't want to compare 2017, but one of the things you said about 2017 about player led, and how are you feeling about this year's team? And Scott said, I feel much better than I did before. I feel like really good about this team, having some of that continuity. And he says, I can tell you what happened from 16 to 17. If that can happen this year, in this second year, it will definitely, we should see um, some movement as far as, how we perform, because he says the first year, like last year, just like the first year in 2016, I'm hoarse when I come off the field, just too much correction, too much coaching. And he goes, that second year, when things got out of line, McKenzie or one of the other guys would kind of step in and kind of get things right the ship, get the guys back on there. And he goes, when you have players leading the team, it allows that head coach to do more game planning and doing the things that do. So when you're not having to do so much correction, when you have people on your team that kind of know what they expect, and they're helping you get that message across, you can improve faster. Because I think that's what one of the things is, we just didn't improve fast enough over time. So I thought that was a great question. They had talked about, you do have some continuity there, but what things are you looking to do as you get going? And he says we still have to continue to learn, especially in fall camp. I got to definitely hone in from what we've done in spring and what we start to do in fall camp. What can these guys do so that it helps me prepare my game plans? And what things are they not good at? What can they not do yet so that I can get them to improve? So really focusing on the cans to, okay, that way I can game plan, and the can not, so we can develop and continue to build over time. One of the guys from Texas asked about, he lived in Texas a little bit as a kid, and asked him about, does he still recruit Texas? And, he says, you cast a wide net, because he says, Orlando is kind of a destination. A lot of kids get down there like, wow, this is great. They really, just haven't seen some things like this before, and, really enjoy a lot of things that Orlando gives. And so, yes, he still likes to really, Florida. It's easier to drive than it is to, fly and do all that stuff. But he is aware of how much talent is in Texas, and he will continue to do that. And the other real good question I thought was asked by a Porter. He says, what have you learned from your time as head coach? And Scott actually backed it up. He goes, well, first you're just a position coach, and then you move from, and you're learning that. And then you move from a position coach to, I was moved to a coordinator and a quarterbacks coach, and I had to learn through that. And then, then I became a head coach for the first time, and I had to learn through that. And he says the thing about coaching is, doesn't matter where you are in the process, you are always learning. No matter what you're doing, you're always learning. You're learning from position to positions to coordinators to, head coaches. You are always, he says, he's still learning every single day. And so I thought that was, a great interview by Scott. And like I said, it was a little slow getting out the gate, but really thought, he kind of answered that, and the questions. And I feel pretty good about it. I know there were some other people not so much about, some of the questions, and where was the buzz, and why wouldn't, there this excitement about having Scott Frost up there. But there were just so many other storylines, and right now UCF's at a point where they're like, what are you? a lot of people kind of going around, are you even going to be good this year? I mean, so there's still a lot to go. So the other thing I want to touch on here is I want to touch on the Suns did an interview with Terry Mohajir, and they really broke it down, and I have some thoughts on that. So I'm gonna switch over that, and just so you know, we're not running on Dunkin' today, we're running on adrenaline. I'm still in that jet lag from coming 4 time zones away. So, but I'm gonna pause it real quick and then come back and talk about Terry. So one thing about access to Terry is it's not always the easiest to get him because most of the time he's coming up there to like introduce a new coach or just kind of do a quick snippet of some things. He just doesn't get a lot of airtime like this. So this was a good chance for Trace and um, Ela wasn't there, but Adam was there to Adam and Trace to really get some questions in that you normally don't get to do. And I kind of picked out some of the ones I thought were pretty interesting and would kind of share my thoughts as well. So one of the things they asked was, what's your role as AD? Like, what do you feel like especially with the football program and other things? And Terry pretty much said, my job as an AD is support my coaches, and when they have needs to make sure that they're getting met. He says he does like to do a check in, pretty regular, but especially like during the season with Coach Frost, he wants to get with him just to make sure there's no snags or anything that he can help with, and just kind of be a sounding board too for Scott. Like if he has some frustrations or wants to kind of get a different perspective, that he wants to be able to offer that. But I mean, he said that's the biggest thing, and he kind of got into same thing with Dawkins. He's like because there's been a lot of people upset about the extension and one of the things Terry says, like, going through supporting Johnny, with the big change, he's like, the Big 12 in basketball is much different than what we came from. And, with all the turnover and everything that's going, I mean, I feel like, Dawkins has it in the right direction. I'll touch on if we can get another player in that mix, I'll touch on that at the end. I mean, and he already had 1 year, so he just added 2 more years. It's 3 more years. Like I said, I love Johnny. I've told you that before on podcasts. I feel like he's doing a great job, and I'm looking forward to seeing, if we can create that magic and maybe go a little bit farther this time because we kind of fizzled out at the end of the season. Hope we can, keep it going this year. And then they got to talking about the football program and things like that. And Terry was just like, most of the time I get football right, and he just says, you know, I really feel like it's about the evaluation. You got to make sure you're evaluating and getting the right evaluation. And he didn't say his name, but he kind of was like the last coach, kind of threw Gus under the bus a little bit, just didn't quite get that evaluation piece right. And he was really honing in on the quarterback. And he gave a stat. It was funny because like he started asking questions because that was one of the things a couple of people in the comments on Suns were like, why is he asking? Who's interviewing who here? But he kind of threw a stat out and then was asking, did you know about this? But he threw out and he said, if you take 4 quarterbacks, Dante Culpepper, Blake Bortles, KZ, Mackenzie Milton, and even Dylan Gabriel in the 1 year or 2 years he was there, he said we had over a 700 win percentage. And he says, without those guys, without the right quarterback, we're right at 500. And that's a huge swing, between, being 6-6 and being able to beat 8 or 9 wins in a season. You got to have the right guy, and that comes down to evaluation. And he just feels like, that's the one thing, he feels like Scott's doing is doing a better job of evaluating. And we're going to see. I mean, we're going to see how Alonzo is. I mean, we have PTSD with Jefferson, and that fiasco. And then, you know, JR, I like JRP too. The two sport athlete, watched him at both. I mean, he was a fun guy to watch. But again, you took a receiver that wants to play quarterback, and so there wasn't that higher level development that was there. So they also talked about facilities, and one of the things with Eric Lopez, spending a lot of time with these guys, he really hammers on softball, and they're talking about they really need shade and those types of things. And so they were asking Terry about some of the facilities. Of course, he's really excited about the Roth Tower. He just is. I mean, it's the next. I mean, this is what's being built. It's going to add some experience. but fans are like, it's not going to add to my experience. So unless you're upper echelon, it's not going to add it. Because I mean, granted, I'll never see what the Roth Tower looks like. I mean, other than from the outside. I mean, that's not my ticket that I get into. But what it also is going to do is it's going to generate some revenue dollars to put more back into the program. So I understand why you build more of something like that before you build those mid-level seats in there that more people can afford, because you just can't move the needle. And those fans are the ones that are the least, if it goes south on a season, they bail and they sell the ticket, or they're just not there. Those other ones, they're gonna bring in people and kind of wine and dine, and those, if they sell it, they're going to utilize that. So it's almost like it's more guaranteed revenue to help continue to do what we need to do. So that's where I kind of disagree. But one of the things that they kind of pushed Terry on was like, well, what else is down the pipe? And he says, well, one of the things I really wanted to concentrate when I first got here is we need to improve the players and coaches, because that, we kind of got to take care of them so that they want to stay here, and continue to push us forward where we're trying to get. And then softball continues, comes up about how it needs shade and all this kind of stuff. And he kind of blew it off and kind of made a smart comment. Well, where's the money? And I think the reason is that he doesn't want to put the money into softball, because I think there is some thought process of like, is this really where we want to keep that softball complex? Because with how successful they're getting, may want to make it a little bit bigger. They're kind of landlocked around there. So I mean, you can build big shade structures and everything. That's a lot of capital that you're going to put into that. And is it really going to be what you need to do? Maybe there's some bigger things. And I think Terry has learned that you cannot push things out too quickly, because you get excited about it. And I'm going to use the lazy river thing. Is they push that out and everybody's like, where is it? Where is it? Well, I just think he has figured out that dollars are better spent other places than a lazy river. Granted, maybe kind of cool, but is that really where we need the money? So I think he's being more tight to the vest of, we got to make sure strategic planning and what things we're looking for. I'm sure he's keeping Cindy Ball Malone updated on what his thoughts were. I'm sure she's in those conversations, but it's just a lot of moving pieces. And that's where they were talking about, well, Terry, where's the buzz? There's not a buzz about the season. People didn't, we're here in Dallas outside of, oh, you got Alonzo. That's great. I mean, there's just not a lot of buzz. And, Terry was just like, what are you talking about? And like I said, he's sitting there with donors and people that are excited about the Roth Tower and the players and the coaches, and they're excited about the season. But yeah, the fan base is kind of, seems to be kind of down on the season and what's coming up, and why is there not all this energy and all these other things. But to me, it doesn't really matter about the buzz for us, in my opinion. It's all about, that the team has to have a sense of urgency that they have to perform this year. They have to create that level where they're going out and they're competing and they are winning, because winning gets you the buzz. That's the reason I mean, we were 5-7, 4-8 the year before. you know you know 6-6, barely made a bowl game and lost the bowl game 6-7. I mean, what has UCF done to create buzz? I mean, last year it was because Scott Frost was back. That was the buzz. That was it. I mean, we got to start winning to create that buzz. And, those are the things that I feel like, fans need to understand. So, I'm excited about the season to see what happens. Could be great season, could be crappy again. We don't know. I mean, that's, but we're under the radar. Nobody's expecting anything from us. So let's see what happens. It's almost like basketball. They weren't expecting a lot of things, and then we kind of surprised some people there. And then there was a big banter back and forth between the two on Trace asked the questions about where is UCF right now? Where's the brand? And Terry said emerging. And immediately he goes, still? And, I think Terry kind of got a little flustered by this. And this is one of the things that one of the guys that was mentioning, because Adam did like he's doing a podcast without the video. And he mentioned that one of the comments was like, you know, Terry's response, but he didn't get prepped on that. So I think it kind of took Terry off guard. And one of the things he was like kind of defending, like, hey, we got this going on, we got this, some of these other sports are doing well, but really revolves around football, and football's got to do it. And, I mean, I think I've talked to Trace a few times, just, offline and stuff at some of the games that I've seen him at. And he likes to push, he likes to, get questions, and, he's definitely passionate about UCF and the sports programs, and what are we doing, and wanting to get answers, and it gets frustrating from time to time because he wants to be able to give the fan base the nuggets. Here he is right here. He can create this to where he's giving them some things so they can be excited about stuff, and emerging is not exciting. And this is where, again, and I'll talk about kind of why I do this podcast and why I started it, but I've been reading. I don't know if any of y'all know Simon Sinek. He is a speaker. He's wrote some books. I've read a couple of his books, but one that I read over my vacation was called The Infinite Game. And he says a lot of leaders have what's called a finite. We got to win this quarter, win this season, hit this marker. And then what happens is they hit that marker and then they stop and they're like, okay, we're just going to hit this next marker. Well, winning is infinite. It's got to continue. And the example I'm going to give you is from Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin said one of the things that drove him crazy about Saban is when the year they won the national title, he wanted coaches to report the next day at 8 a.m. And the reason he wanted that is because we're behind. All these other teams have been off. They've been already ahead of the schedule. We got to get back on it. And that's because winning the championship was not the ultimate goal. That was one of the many things, but it's the continued success, continue to be better than we were even last year, improving in all those areas. And of course, that's the end goal for that season, but it's not the end goal for this team. This team is to continue to do that. So you're kind of in always a state of emerging. And I thought that was a pretty interesting, thing that Lane said, and kind of where I was like, so sometimes I feel like our fans and even media get a little fickle, and even all teams, because they want to know answers and stuff. But I think sometimes you just got to put faith in that they're going to do it, and then they need to go out and prove it to us. And if too many times they don't, that's when you have what we did with Satya Messer. We giving it to you. We understand you're against the odds with a lot of the other Big 12 teams, but you got to produce. Somehow you got to produce. So, so one of the reasons I told y'all that I did this podcast last year is I wanted to create a different perspective, a different narrative out there. I'm much more optimistic about the season, as well as my projection showed you. I feel like we could go 8-4, and I feel like we're going to surprise some people. So I also feel like, you can't worry about making others happy. So just because my perspective doesn't meet yours, I'm not trying to make you happy. You're not trying to make me happy. Nobody's trying to make, you're trying to go out and you're trying to do what you feel is right. That's what Scott's doing. What I feel is my opinion on this stuff. That's what the other guys are giving you their opinion. And I think it's good to hear other people's thoughts and other people's process. But here's the thing is, one, I think we're better in many positions outside of possibly offensive line, which I know is a hot button for people. And even when the Suns interviewed Scott, he named 4 linemen, and you have 5 on the offensive line. One of them may switch. So it looks like they're not quite set on even the starting 5. We'll see. But again, he's going to go through fall camp. I trust the fact that they're in there. I really feel like, they took a step back last year, losing Coach Clark. Now they have a new coach in there. And, I think they learned a lot from last season about how their play really affected the offensive rhythm. But I also told you in other podcasts, I don't feel like it was just them. I think the quarterback had a lot to do with it, and even some of the running backs not picking up assignments and doing other things. So second thing is I trust the coaches. I mean, I feel that we got good people in there, and if things can come together, I feel like they can really lead this team and get us into a much better season than possibly projected, to start letting us feel like we're making some of the right strides. And of course, winning helps do a lot of things with recruiting, and just it changes the perspective. I've been watching a lot of the Netflix, 250th year. They had a lot of things on the battle of, um, the Revolutionary War and things like that, and how, when you have those positive things, how that can be infectious. Third thing is there's a lack of attention on us. Good. I don't want a lot of it. Gus brought a lot of things, the future of college football, and just did a lot of things out there. And Scott's more the mindset, let's win and earn it. We haven't done anything yet. Why should they be talking about us? So, felt like the last coach kind of under delivered a little bit. Scott's a little quieter in his approach, and we'll see what happens. Fourth thing is offense can actually, I feel this year, complement the defense because last year defense was solo. They were doing so much to give offensive opportunities, and the offense would squander with penalties or not being effective or turnovers. And I just feel like that's going to be a thing. And fifth and last thing is in the words of Aaron Rodgers, who is not my favorite, RELAX. Season's coming. I mean, I'm sitting here and I mean, I'm 10 days from going back to work. And I always kid people. I'm like, I kind of like, oh, the summer's ending, but that means I'm getting closer to football. So it's right around it. We're going to know. We're going to know really soon. Just be supportive, be ready to go. We'll see what the product is. I mean, we're putting all these assumptions out there and making judgments on what we don't know yet. Let's save our judgments for when we see it, and then be critical. Be critical if you see something at that point. We were very critical of some things last year, not being able to punch the ball in, killing ourselves with penalty. I mean, those were definitely things that killed us. But let's not just feel like the sky is falling right now. Let's kind of wait on that. Now, some of the other things that I found interesting from the Big 12 was one, there wasn't as much Sorsby talk as I thought that would be, and it was actually kind of refreshing. I was kind of glad, but it was more kind of nationally, kind of got earlier ahead. It was more focused on kind of what's coming up for the teams. I found it interesting that two teams did not bring quarterbacks because, of course, we didn't bring one last year because we didn't have a true number one. Well, West Virginia and Arizona State did not bring a quarterback to the Big 12 Media Days. So probably kind of where we were last year. They're kind of trying to figure it out. West Virginia, I know he's got a couple in there, and he's got some good talent. He's just probably trying to figure it out. I don't think he's quite in the position where we were last year, where we had three not so talented, and which one would rise to the top. I think that's a true battle, but I feel like the Arizona State one is possibly kind of like what we were, which is actually exciting to me because we play them. And Arizona State, good coach, got a system going there. If they find the right quarterback, which, towards the end of the season after their injury to Sam, and they got him in there and figured out what he could do. I think that's the thing that scares me is we have him so late. But to keep an eye on, Mikey Keene is on that quarterback roster room, and curious. I mean, he has game reps. I mean, he's played in some big games, and he's played a lot at Fresno State. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. So, and then one of the biggest questions I was glad that Suns, touched on was like they got asked a lot why players were in pads. And I kind of was having the same thing. They were interviewing Alonzo and he's in pads. Everybody was in pads, but they let us know that they do some shoots during that time so that during the year, during their games, they have them in pads, like if they want to, highlight them for some reason. So I thought that was a pretty interesting fact that I did not know, but I had the same question. All right, I know this one's getting long, but that's what happens when you go on vacation. There's so much to talk about. So, last couple things I just wanted to touch on before I wrap this episode up, and that's one, um, the UCF basketball story I kind of hinted on. Jamichael Stillwell really has been putting out a lot of things about really want to be a knight. Then he was like, "Oh, we're almost there." Well, it comes to find out they're denying him eligibility. So him and like I think there's like 18 they're in there. They're suing the NCAA over eligibility, and he really wants to be a knight, which would be exciting if we could get him. And I'll keep you posted for what I know. But the one thing I found interesting in the article is they're referencing the fact that this is the class of 2022. And when they came in and, um, you know, this was when the COVID year where players are getting the extra year. So a lot of them were having to kind of sit behind older guys that normally would have been out. And now they're not getting the same opportunity, even though it stated that seniors that graduated, they're not eligible. This is July 1st. It's going to start from this point forward. But one of the things that Michael is arguing is, I shouldn't have those two junior college years counting against me because JUCO players have had extra eligibility in the past outside of COVID. They were given because it wasn't as counted upon as the highest level of eligibility, and they've typically been offered additional years. So he's running out of time because school's right around the corner. We probably got about 6 weeks. So I don't know. I'm gonna keep my eye on it, keep refreshing, keep seeing if something happens. But gosh, if he could get there, boy, with that front court of John Bowl and him, I'd feel really, really good going into the season. He was such a rebound machine and just a dominant force down there. So hoping that that works out in our favor. A couple of just worldwide things that were going on. You had the British Open that was going on. A couple cool stories. Sam Burns wasn't planning on playing, knew that the PGA was kind of his last event, was expecting a baby. The baby came early July. His wife really pushed him to go play. Didn't have too good of a first day, but comes around and shoots a 62 on day two to get to 5 under. He was actually one of three players to shoot a 62, which is 8 under. It's a par 70, but still, pretty good. And then he ended up being the third round leader at 10 under. He had, a lead going into the final round, but shot two over and ended up not winning. Felt bad because he was close in three of the four majors, but congratulations on the baby. I know he's kind of probably kicking himself, but it was good to kind of see that story. But the biggest story, Bryson DeChambeau, poor guy. So Friday's round, he was assessed a penalty, and he was assessed a penalty because they said that he improved his lie. Now, there are people on both sides of the fence, but it's in high fescue grass. And he's over there walking around, kind of assessing his ball. But while he's doing this, there's definitely some exaggerated stomping going on. And he's arguing the fact, well, I got to look and I got to do this, but it was a little bit exaggerated. And the thing is that, you know, I feel like he has to realize that the rule doesn't state, well, you had to go look at your ball. I mean, it's not that way. It's not, they didn't say he did it on purpose, is I guess what I'm trying to get at. But it definitely improved his club not hitting in this backswing by the stomping. So the fact that he displaced the weeds that much helped him out. I don't care what he says, it helped him out, whether it's purposeful or not. He deserved the penalty. So that people are on the fence both ways, but Roy did hold back, which I found funny. But yeah, there's just always drama around that guy. Just not a big Bryson fan with the whole scientific swing and all that kind of stuff. So, but congratulations to Ryan Fox, New Zealander. He plays super fast. Like it was so weird, like watching him. I mean, they had to get to him quick. He does not assess. He gets up, makes his decision, and goes. Nothing more than when he sat there on the final hole and he was putting to win the tournament. And after the player that he was playing with, Burns, knocked his in and got out of the way, took him 22 seconds to make his putt to win. I mean, he just wastes no time. He birdied four out of the last six. There was one where he was hit backwards and saved himself a bogey, got a par on 17, which you're like, oh man, he's going to have to tie and play a playoff because hardly anybody. I think there was four birdies on 18 going in. He was the fifth. He was either the fourth or fifth. Just not many birdies. It's a long, difficult hole, and he ends up making it. So congratulations on that. And then wow, World Cup. I missed a lot of the games, in between, with my travel, but was home for the weekend and watched the third place game. Wow. Spain got up 4-0. I actually turned it off and turned on a movie because I was like, it's just so bad. By the time the movie was over, I realized, oh my gosh, they had made a comeback. It was like 4-3 at that point. And I was like, okay, well, let me get back into it. And then 87th minute, Spain scores again. They're down two. I'm like, it's over. 90 and plus some stoppage time. France comes back and scores again, makes it 5-4, and it was pretty quick. But then Spain 2 minutes later comes back, gets the decisive goal, wins 6-4. Um, I'm sorry, England. I was England, France, England. So England comes back and scores to make it 6-4. So England wins the third place game. France ends up fourth. Spain actually played the next day versus Argentina in the final 0-0 at the end of extra time. But in or in the stoppage time, and in that time though, unfortunately, Argentina picked up a red card and was playing down a player, and it kind of hurt him there in the extra time. And let me see, it was a 106-minute. Spain scores, pretty much kind of played keep away from there, and Spain wins the World Cup 1-0. So Messi doesn't get his win, and it was funny because I was actually yesterday at a store, and I'll tell you where I was here in just a second. But I was at a store, and the guy's getting extremely frustrated with the calls that Argentina gets. And he goes, "You know what FIFA stands for?" Basically, he said FIFA stands for FIFA in for Argentina. So basically saying that they get all the calls. So it was quite interesting, um, about that. So vacation was absolutely fantastic. Alaska is all that I dreamed of and more. Best views, and just at awe at how things are so different. Up there in the 49th state. So really enjoyed. But one of the things that I hated up there was, I told you I was going to post some stuff while I was away, and I couldn't because my phone outside of Anchorage, Alaska, as soon as I got the outskirts, was giving me the fritz, was not working. So my service provider now has been dropped. I went and was actually at the store that I was to get my phone, and that's where I heard the guy talking about the about FIFA favoring Argentina. But it was so funny because I go and get it done, and then I get home, and then I can't download any of my apps because it's hooked to an old email address that's no longer active and can't remember the password. So I had to do like this reset, and it takes a while for security checks and all this kind of stuff, security base. So right now I have very little apps, and then none of my music came over, and it's tied all to the other Apple ID. So I don't know if I'm gonna get anything back. So been battling with it a little bit, but going to stay focused because, again, 10 days till I go back to work. So I'm gonna really hammer down. Again, I'm going to come back on my next episode. I'm going to talk about my projections for Big 12, where everybody ends up, including where I think UCF will be in that mix, and then we'll do that 30-3 with 3 episodes, 10 years, taking us over the last 30 years of Division I football for our UCF Knights. So wow, look at that. Almost a 45-minute episode. Thanks for hanging in with me, guys. I really appreciate it. And as always, go Knights. Charge on.